The concept of systems thinking and systems and developing systems for your church is something that I have personally been thinking about and working on for many years. I mean, it goes back probably at least 10, 12 years ago for me. I was pastoring, and my church was at a point where things were going really well. I mean, it certainly wasn't born out of problems, but it was born out of just a necessity to say, you know what, we have got to start looking at the next level. We've got to figure out how we can go from, the things that we're doing now. We were kind of maintaining some things, and the church was growing. We were seeing some good things happening. We had just moved into a new building, a sanctuary building. We were seeing a good number of guests come in, and there was a lot of things we just weren't doing very well, to be honest with you. And so I began really trying to think through the idea of systems and what it takes to really organizationally manage or run your church. Now, and let me just say this, and I always say this when I do this seminar, because this seminar has the tendency to sound very sterile and clinical and lecture-y, if that's even a word. And I know that there is a biblical, spiritual principle to this, okay? And I'm not going to deal with that part of it because that's not really what this is about. But please let me just say this and understand. I know that God said, I'll build my church. And I know that God can do anything, okay? God can take a mess and He can do something with it if He chooses to. God can take very inequipped, unorganized, whatever people, and He can do something great. And it's only through the power of the Holy Spirit that people's lives are changed and people get saved. I understand all of that. So please don't misunderstand anything that I'm saying here as replacing that, okay? That is the foundation. We're coming into this assuming that all of that is in place, okay? And that we know that there's the spiritual element. But on top of that spiritual element, if you look at all of that as kind of as the foundation, the spiritual part of it is the foundation of a building. We all know how important the foundation is, right? I mean, if you don't have the proper foundation on a building, the building will not stand. And you can make it as beautiful as you want. You can put as many decorations and paint it as beautiful as you want to paint it on the outside. But if it doesn't have a strong foundation, it will not stand over the long haul, long test of time. So the spiritual application is certainly the foundation, but the things that we're going to be talking about is that framework for the structure. Okay, it is the framework for the building or the institution of the church. And this is really kind of an interesting thing and how all of this kind of came together for me because as I said, I was pastoring. I was trying to figure out some things that I didn't learn in Bible college. I didn't learn in seminary. I didn't learn when I was trying to, nobody told me this stuff. This is just kind of stuff I had to figure out for myself. And as I was trying to put it together and try to really understand, I began talking to everybody that I could talk to about church and about how things, are managed and how you take care of things and how do you put these things together. And I just was talking to as many people as I could and trying to figure out just stuff for myself, for my own church. And that's kind of how this all was developed and born out of. And I began one day thinking that there's got to be some kind of a list out there wherever that is some kind of a definitive or a comprehensive list of systems or structures or whatever you want to call them. I call them systems, and that'll make more sense in a minute, that the church has to make it function properly and be healthy. And I believe that, it's not about church growth, it is about church health, because I believe that healthy things grow. And so if you have a healthy church, you will have a growing church. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to have a mega church. It doesn't mean that you're going to double in the next year or whatever. I mean, the numbers aren't even that important. As long as the health is there and as long as we are impacting our community and as long as we are seeing lives changed and people's lives transformed, people being saved, that's signs of a healthy church. But how do we do all of those things? There's a lot of moving parts to all of that. And so I began looking and reading. I read everything that I could read, everything I could find on systems, and like I said, talk to people. And some of this was born out of the strangest way. And I was at an event that most of us hate to go to. It was a family reunion. And I had gone, not only was it a family reunion, it was my wife's family reunion. And not only was it my wife's family reunion, but it was my wife's father's mother's family reunion. And she has been dead for years, but somebody on that side of the family thought it'd be great to get all that family together. Most of us didn't even know people. I ran into a lady from the Locust Grove Free Will Baptist Church that was my wife's cousin by marriage. I didn't even know I was related to her. I mean, that's how obscure this family reunion was. But at any point, it was good because I met this other lady that was there, who was my wife's cousin, twice removed on whatever number, very distant cousin. And I was talking to her about what I did, and I was, like I said, mission director in Oklahoma at the time, and we were sharing about church and all that, and she said, well, that's interesting. She said, my husband is a mission director for Southern Baptist, and she said, he's around here, and he's a tall guy, and maybe you'll run into him, and she said, you'd probably like to talk to him. So I ran into him a little bit later in the day, and so I met him. His name was Stephen Parks, and Dr. Stephen Parks, and he had just finished his doctoral dissertation on, guess what? Church revitalization, specifically systems and systems thinking. And so we began talking, and I said, man, I'm so interested in this subject, and I just really want to, get as deep into this as I can, to learn as much as I can. And little did I know, over the next couple of years, I would be transitioning from pastoring to the state mission director, because I was still pastoring at the time, and moving into the next year or two into the state office there in Oklahoma. And we began working in church revitalization and church planting, a lot of things that this stuff was so valuable for. But at this time, it was just kind of an idea in my head as something that a pastor was trying to figure out for my own church. And so when I was talking to Stephen Parks, he began sharing with me some of the things that he was doing and that they were doing in Southern Baptist to train some of their pastors in revitalization and things that they were doing. And he said, hey, I'm doing a training down in our area in a few weeks or whatever, and he was down in Texas. And he said, why don't you come down for the training? And so I went down there sometime later, and a lot of the material that I use is certainly not my material, but it's material from him, from other places that I have just kind of put together. But I've come upon what I feel like and what I have begun to call 8 essential systems for the church. And these are 8 things that I believe that every church has to have to be healthy. Now, let me just kind of back up for a minute. I said systems thinking would make more sense in a minute. Let me define what a system is, or what systems thinking is, because the system is what I call to be, and this is my own definition, so I mean it may make sense or it may not, but systems are a bunch of pieces of things that work together to accomplish something. Does that make sense? The best way to explain it is like a chain, okay? A chain has a lot of different links. Every link is a system in your church. And when you link those links together, it forms a chain. Now, the chain may be, how many ever links long. In this particular case, this chain that we're going to look at today has 8 links. And those 8 links are very important. Every link is vital, and I believe essential. That's why I call them essential systems, because I believe that you have to have all 8 in order for your church to be healthy. Now, if you have 7, your church may still function, but it's not going to be healthy. You may not even realize that your church isn't healthy until some point something is going to break down. And I like to kind of use the human body, as an example. Back in 2000, the year 2000, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. And that happened because I got an intense pain in my side at the National Convention in Anaheim, California in the year 2000. I'll never forget it. We stood up for the invitation on Wednesday night, and it was like somebody stabbed me with a hot knife. I mean, it just was a terrible pain. Ended up in the emergency room that night. Long story short, they got me feeling a little better. Got back to Oklahoma, ran some tests, found out I had cancer, had surgery, removed a foot of my colon, the tumor, been cancer-free for 16 years now almost, so I'm doing great. But my point in telling that story is the doctor said that particular kind of tumor that I had was a very slow-growing cancer. I was only 36 when I got it, so there was no need to have an annual colonoscopy or whatever. But he said I'd probably had it for 2 or 3 years. Now, for 2 or 3 years, I had a cancer growing in my body, and I didn't know it until finally the day came when my body shut down. And I began feeling pain because, I don't like pain. I'm not my wife. My wife can take pain. I can't take pain. I'm the biggest baby in the world. And some people maybe could have lived through that pain and brushed it off. Not me. I'm going to the emergency room. And it's a good thing I did, because then they diagnosed the problem and I got it, taken care of and all of that. But again, my point is that a lot of churches have cancer growing in them and they don't even realize it. They don't know it, or they know something's not quite right, or they know that things aren't maybe like they should be, but you just kind of sweep it under the rug, or you ignore it, or you just kind of put it off because you don't want to have to deal with a lot of those difficult things that you have to deal with when you deal with problems in the church. But the human body has systems that have to be working together for your body to be healthy. And you can ignore the symptoms, you can ignore various things, but at some point your body's going to shut down, and it's going to be catastrophic if you ignore symptoms. The same way with the church. We can ignore certain problems, we can ignore certain things in the church, but catastrophic things are going to eventually happen. It's inevitable. The church is going to shut down. As a body, it's going to shut down if it is not healthy. So let me give you these 8 essential elements that I believe every church has to have. And so what systems thinking is, I kind of skipped over that. It defines systems, the pieces that work together to form a whole, okay? And so systems thinking is trying to go from looking at the church as just one thing and look at it as all of these integrated systems or these pieces that make up the whole. Okay, that's what systems thinking is. It's kind of like if you were to, hone in on something in a microscope or a telescope or whatever, binoculars, and then you kind of zoom back out and then you see the whole picture. That's kind of what systems thinking is. And it's a real study, it's a real science. It's a real thing. If you're interested in that kind of thing, I'm kind of weird like that. I like that kind of stuff. But it's really fascinating when you really start to think about it. So let me give you the 8 systems, and I will break these down, and I'll spend more time on some than others. But let me just tell you, I'm not going to tell you really kind of how to fix the problem in this seminar. This is more of the broad strokes. I'm going to kind of paint the big picture, and then you'll have to do some work. You'll have to go back to your church, and that's what I hope that you'll do with this, is go back to your church and say, okay, does my church have these 8 things? If I have 6 of them, then there's 2 I need to develop. Or if I have all 8, but 3 of them aren't functioning properly, we need to work on those or whatever. That's what I hope that you can do with this. I hope it's practical, because this doesn't do any good for me just to give you a list and you just leave here and say, oh, that was a good list or whatever. You need to really think about it in the context of your church. What does your church look like in every area of this? So let me give you the 8 essentials. Number 1 is outreach. Now let me say this about outreach, and I believe this with every fiber of my being, that outreach is the only way your church is ever going to see sustainable and significant growth. It's the only way. There may be some people that drive by and see your sign, and I love Jim's session that he did. That's my favorite session. I've heard that thing 100 times, and I still love to hear it. It is so accurate and so true, everything he said. So true. And some of the stuff I'm going to talk about tomorrow kind of are similar things, but when I talk about creating the wow factor for your church. But outreach is essential for your church. Some people are going to see your sign. They're going to drive by. Some people are going to Google a church in your area and find you or whatever. Some people are going to happen to you. Okay? They're going to just kind of fall in your lap. Thank God. Praise the Lord. Those are the easy catches. Okay? When somebody moves into your area and they're looking for a Free Will Baptist church or whatever church you are, whatever, they're looking for, something in their area, and they come to you. We wish they'd all do that, right? But that doesn't happen all the time. Most of the time, we have to go and fish, right? The fish don't come to us. We have to go get the fish. And so we have to have outreach. It is the only way your church will ever see significant and sustainable growth. Now, outreach is really just one piece of another puzzle. Again, we don't have time to get into all of the facets of this. But let me just give you very quickly, very simply, some different outreach ideas, not necessarily specific ideas for outreach events, but things that you need to think about when it comes to outreach. The first one is that your church needs to have on-site events at your church, things that you do on your church property, your church campus. Okay, those can be things like special services, your vacation Bible school. You may do a trunk or treat or a fall festival or an Easter egg hunt or whatever. You can do all kinds of things at your church. When I was pastoring in Oklahoma, our church was a voting precinct. We had a ladies' club that used our church building. We had the Chickasaw Nation Head Start used our building for graduations, for any kind of special events. Anytime they had to have a gathering, they would use our church for that. We had the child, oh goodness, what's the name of it? When the court would take kids away from their parents, and they mandated the parents to take classes, parenting classes. I'm having a hard time thinking. We had those at our church. I even got to help teach those. The lady at our county extension office that taught those said, "Hey, would you help teach some of these classes?" I said, "Absolutely, as long as I can say whatever I want to say." She said, "You can say whatever you want to say." I taught parenting classes in our church to court-mandated parents that had lost their kids from DHS. That's what I was trying to think of earlier. And I got to tell them why I thought they needed to raise their kids in church and discipline them and all that. And I considered all that stuff outreach because that was stuff that people came to our church facility. And I always made sure we had a table set up with a nice tablecloth on it with information about our church on it or whatever. When people would walk through our foyer to go vote, or people would come in for those child-rearing classes. We had exercise classes at our church. We had all kinds of stuff. And I know the first question is, well, don't people take advantage of that stuff? Yes. Don't people mess things up? Yes. We had a lady that came for a club meeting, went out a back exit that she was not supposed to go out. It wasn't even marked as an exit, fell down the stairs, broke her glasses, and wanted the church to pay for her glasses. So we did. A couple of $100. Yes, you're going to have problems. As Jim said, people are annoying. Okay? You're going to have problems. Yes. There are liability issues. Yes. There's all that stuff. But if, like Jim said with that, I love it when he tells that story about that sign in the parking lot. You go into church, there's no kids. Why? Because the sign outside says no skateboarding, no rollerblading. You know, they're saying we don't want kids on our property. Now, I know there's liability issues. I know I get all that stuff. But you've got to do things on your church facility, at your church campus. That is your on-site outreach events. And it can be all kinds of things. And the ideas are really unlimited in what you can do. Also, you need to do off-site outreach events. That's where your church gets out into the community. And you can hand out bottles of water or the little popsicle things to kids in the park and pick up trash and do things, you know, in your community. I have a friend in Oklahoma, their church every year or something, they go through and they paint fire hydrants. Now, you do that in cooperation with the fire department. Don't just go out painting fire hydrants, but you know, you work with them. And there's all kinds of community projects that you can do like that, and it puts your church name out there. When I was at a church in Oklahoma City years and years ago, we did all kinds of community events, and they would sometimes they would put your name up, you know, on display, whatever, for what you were doing. You know, cleaning the highway. They'll put up a sign for your church. I mean, all kinds of stuff that you can do that's off-site events that helps people identify with your church, to know that your church is involved in the community, that you do care about your community. So you need to get off-site and do things in the community. Another big part of that whole outreach thing is the marketing issue. And Jim spoke to this stuff, but all of the stuff that you do that identifies people to your church is considered outreach, whether it's print design, your website, your social media page, all of that kind of stuff, your logo, all of that is a part of your marketing. I know that's a bad word in the church. For some reason, we don't like the word marketing, but that's what we're doing. We're trying to help people connect our church to something so that it's recognizable. Experts say that it takes multiple touches, and I've read everything as much as 4 to up to 7 or 8 of touches that a person has to have before they'll ever really remember anything. You know that card that you spend so much money on to have printed and mailed out? Most of them, they look at the front, they look at the back, and they throw it away. Okay? But if you market yourself right and you have your logo on it, you use similar colors, and the next time they see your church sign and it's in the same colors or this logo's the same, that's a second touch. And then you go to the festival downtown that your city has, whatever that is, and you have your little tent set up where you're giving away free water, and the labels on the bottle have your church name and your colors and your logo, and your tent is your church colors and your logo. Are you getting the idea here? I mean, you're marketing your church, and that way when people have a need, if they decide someday, hey, I'm going to go to church, maybe they'll come to your church. Amen. Now, I mean, maybe not, but maybe they will. I mean, that's what marketing does. And Jim talked about it with the cereal box. It's how we portray ourselves, how we put ourselves. So marketing is a big part of it. So I could talk about that. I'd do another whole seminar just on outreach. It's a big deal. But that's the first essential system, is outreach. The second one is assimilation or follow-up. I think that we in the church, and I'm just talking about Free Will Baptist, but I'm talking about just the universal church, we do a poor job in evangelism, but I think we do even a worse job in follow-up. I really do. I think somehow we think that magically, because somebody stumbles into our church once, they're just going to love it as much as we do, and they're going to come back week after week. Statistically, according to Tom Rayner, who's the president of Lifeway, Southern Baptist, he says that if you can get 1 out of 4 first-time guests to come back for a second visit, you're doing pretty good. 1 out of 4. Okay, now with effective follow-up, you're hoping you can get 1 out of 4. Now, but if you get a person to come back a second time, there's a 50% chance they'll come back a third time. And every time they come back, your odds increase on getting them to come back for a third, a fourth, a fifth, becoming a regular attender. And so every time you can get a person to come back to church, it's a huge win. So how do you do that? How do you take a first-time visitor that shows up at your church? How do you take them from a first-time visitor to a fully engaged follower of Christ that is every week or every time your doors are open, you hope, member of your church? That's the process of follow-up. That's assimilation. And so that includes everything that you do to follow up on people. It moves people from being a first-time guest to a second-time guest, okay? So what do we do the first week? Well, I'm not telling you how you have to do it, but you need to think through this. Are you going to send a letter? Are you going to send them a text message? Are you going to give them a phone call? Are you going to have a team show up and visit them at their house? Whatever you do, you need to have a systematic plan for it that is written down so that everybody knows what that plan is, or else it's not going to ever happen. It's not going to happen. You can say, oh, we follow. If someone was to say, do you follow up on visitors? Oh, yeah, we follow up on visitors. Well, how do you follow up on visitors? Well, we try. If you ever had the word try in there, that's a bad word. Well, we try to send a letter that first week, or we try to get out and visit them on Thursday night, or we try to do that. No, I'm not talking about what do you try to do. What do you do? Okay? If you have a system for it, then it works. It's automatic. It's what you do. Okay? It's like paying your bills. You have to have a system for it. And so, on Monday we're gonna send them an email. On Tuesday, a card goes in the mail. On Wednesday, they're going to get a phone call from the pastor. On Thursday, the visit, whatever. I mean, I'm not telling you how you have to do it. I'm just saying you need to have some kind of a system. Now, let me just say this. I hear this all the time from pastors, church planters, everybody that I work with. They say, we can't get those cards back. We can't follow up on people because we can't get the cards back. Do you have any answers to that? My answer is always the same. It's let me see your card. Now, I haven't looked at your cards here. I've been sitting on the front. I haven't even looked at them. But most of the time, it's like a credit application. They want your name, first name, middle name, last name, birth date, anniversary, kids' names, ages, gender of your kids, just all this information. Do you really need all that information on a first-time guest? No, you don't. And so the reason, if you struggle getting visitors cards or connection cards back, probably it's because you're trying to get way too much information from a first-time guest. I don't feel comfortable giving everybody all that information. Why would a first-time guest feel comfortable giving it to your church? Now, you will need that information later, and you can get it later. But if you can just get from a first-time guest their name, first and last name, their cell phone number, and their email address, that's a huge score, huge win. Because you can contact them by phone, you can contact them by text message, you can contact them by email, you can search them on social media, and you can send them a friend request or an invitation to like your church page. There's so many things you can do with just those 3 pieces of information. And a person doesn't feel like they're going through a credit application to fill out your visitor's card at your church. So if you're not getting visitors cards back, take a serious look at your card and what it is that you are asking for. Now, if you need certain information for a certain reason, that's fine. But for first-time guests, you probably don't need all the information that you're asking for. So first-time guest, then to a second-time guest. Okay, so what do we do with second-time guests? Well, second-time guests, we're going to add their name to our church newsletter list. And again, I'm not telling you how to do it. I'm just giving you ideas. Or we're going to put them, in a second week. That's when we're going to go to their home and visit them. Or we're going to make sure they get an invitation to our Sunday school or to a small group. Or we're going to do, whatever it looks like, whatever it is. Make sure that you know what you're going to do on a first-time guest and visitor together as a gizitor, if you didn't know that. I try not to say visitor because that's another whole thing. I really like the word guest because I'd rather be a guest than a visitor. A visitor doesn't feel very warm and fuzzy, and guest just makes you feel better. But anyway, I still use both terms, but I like guest better. It's just hard to break old habits. But anyway, so the first week, what are you going to do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever, to get them to be a first-time guest, to be a second-time guest. Then when they come back a second time, this is the thing in place to become a third-time guest. Then this is how we're going to move them into our membership class or our get acquainted class about our church or whatever. And then we're going to move them into a spiritual formations or a discipleship process of some sort. And then we're going to integrate them into ministry. And that's moving people through follow-up or through assimilation. You're taking them from being a first-time guest to a fully devoted, engaged follower of Jesus Christ. And so what does that look like in your church? It could be different for every church, but you need to figure out what that's going to look like. The third system is teaching. Now, I alluded to this a little bit earlier in my session that I did last hour when I was talking about volunteers and expecting high level of expectations from our workers. Your teaching system should include your strategy for all of that stuff that we kind of briefly outlined in that session. In other words, if you work with our children, you're going to have a background check. Okay? A lot of insurance companies require that now. It's just good practice. Now, one of the questions that I get when I talk about that all the time, and I just had this, I was at a southern states. I was in the southern states. Jim was talking about southern states earlier. I'll tell you, I was in Alabama. But I was at this church, and I was talking about this stuff. And this lady raised her hand, and she said, we're going through this at our church right now. She said, can you explain why background checks are important? And she said, because at our church, everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows whose kids belong to who. And so we don't really see a need to have background checks or to do a check-in system or anything because everybody knows everybody and everybody's comfortable with it. Well, and I said to her, and what I would say to you is if you want to stay exactly where you are right now, then that's fine. But if you have a visitor, a guest, that comes to your church with a couple of kids, they want to know that their kids are safe. They want to know that the workers in there, even though you may know them, they don't. And they'll feel more comfortable knowing we do background checks on all of our volunteers that work with our kids. We have a check-in system. No one is allowed to come pick up your child without this stub or this piece of paper, this sticker, or whatever. We take your cell phone number so that if during the service your child becomes upset or has a behavior problem, we will immediately text message you. See, if you know all those people now, you can just walk in and get them and say, hey, your kid's being a little terror back here. No, you wouldn't say that, but we had a youth pastor that did, and we let him go, so don't do that. He actually called him a monster, but that's another story. But if you know everybody, that's fine. But if unless you want to stay right where you are, don't do that. That's why you need a check-in system. That's why you need background checks. That's why you need all that stuff. It needs to be written down. And so people knowing that come into it. You want to have a fight on your hand? Go to that 60-year-old woman that's been working with the children her whole life and say, we want you to do a background check. It's probably not going to happen. But if it becomes a standard policy for all of our children's workers, now and you can use good discretion on that. If you want to grandfather in people that have been working forever, that's, again, I'm not telling you how to do it, but I'm just saying, setting up the system so that in the future, it's progressing towards being the way that it needs to be set up. Okay, so you want to be moving ahead. So you're making sure that your teaching system has a strategy for all of this kind of stuff. Okay, now that's just scratching the surface on that, because then you get into the volunteers that you need, whether it's in children's ministry, youth ministry, greeters, ushers, benevolence, boards and committees, men and women's Bible studies, vacation Bible school, whatever, the list goes on and on and on and on. All of those things. Every ministry in your church should have a ministry description with responsibilities, expectations, all of that kind of stuff printed out so that you can give that to a volunteer and say, here's exactly what we expect, when you serve in this ministry or whatever. So all of those things are a part of your teaching system. Number 4 is worship planning. Worship planning. Now, like I said, a lot of churches have a lot of these systems in place. Now, whether they're really fully functioning or not is another whole story. And worship planning is one that we probably have some system for worship planning, whatever that may be. I mean, sometimes, we had a volunteer worship guy when I was pastoring, and on Wednesday morning, when I got to the church, he'd slide the song choices he'd write it down on a piece of paper. He'd slide it through the crack in the door, and it would be on the floor in the foyer when I got to the church office Wednesday morning. And when our secretary came in and she got ready to do the bulletin for the end of the week. Maybe not a very good system, but it was a system. Okay, that's how he communicated to us the songs that we were going to do, and she would put it in, our secretary would put it in the bulletin and all that kind of stuff. And so whatever it is for your music, for whatever elements you're going to have, if you're going to do a drama or your kids are going to do a special song, or if you're going to have, whatever it is, you need to have some kind of a plan so that you do everything that you do with excellence. And again, it goes back to what I talked about earlier with that 45 minutes that we have in Sunday school. We only have an hour in our worship service, and we've got to get a lot of stuff done in that hour. I mean, there's a lot to do in an hour of a worship time. The last thing you need to do is spend 15 minutes going on giving announcements and talking about this and that and just all that stuff. You got to figure out a better way to do it. I'm just telling you, an hour is not that long. Don't waste time on stuff. And the reason we waste time is because we don't have a plan. We don't have a plan. But if you go into the Sunday service with a plan, all the announcements are going to be on the screen. They're going to be printed in the bulletin. We're going to have a video that's going to play that's going to show, the loop or whatever. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do public announcements. I'm not telling you not to do it. I don't like public announcements personally. But however you can figure it out how to do it, figure out a way to do it and stick with it and do it so that you can maximize that hour. Same with Sunday night, with Wednesday night, with your Sunday school time, all of that sort of stuff. Anything that you have to plan, your worship planning is so important because you've got to plan everything. Now, I'm a planner. I know that. I plan probably to a fault. I don't like shooting from the hip. I don't like things off the cuff. That's just not who I am. I'm the guy that wants to dot the I's and cross the T's and all that kind of stuff. That's just my personality. And I know not everybody's like that, and it's a good thing because we would all be crazy if we were all like me. I understand that. But people that are in charge of things and they let that silence happen and linger, between things or whatever, it just doesn't feel like it's moving to me. It doesn't feel like it's flowing, and nothing can kill your flow and even impede the Spirit to really move is if there's a lot of chatter and if there's a lot of dead space and all of that. So just you plan it. You got to keep it moving. So that's another whole seminar in itself too. But number 5, stewardship. Now this is a really interesting one, and I have talked to our church planters a lot about this, because our church plants are very unique in that most of our church plants are very young. And I don't mean that they haven't been around long. I mean, most of our church plants are filled with very young families. And I learned something that I didn't realize not that long ago when I was standing in the back of the auditorium and I heard somebody say to the pastor, "Pastor, when are we going to get some way for me to give my tithes besides writing a check? I don't order checks. I don't have checks anymore." And I thought, what? You don't have checks? I mean, I'm 53, I think. I'm 52 or 50. I think I'm 53. I was born in 1962. I haven't had my birthday yet this year, so whatever that makes me. I took offense to that too when Jim said it smelled like 1960. Well, I was 62, so anyway. I know I'm not as funny as Jim. Sorry, I'll quit with the jokes. But I thought, what do you mean you don't have checks? And then I started talking to people. Young people don't have checks. They don't write checks. And if you don't have a checkbook and you don't carry cash, how do you pay your tithes or how do you give an offering? The truth of the matter is most young people don't. It's not because they're not willing to. Now, they may not be ready to put in 10%. I don't know. But I'm saying that if you don't have other ways for people to give in your church, you are missing out on a big opportunity to be getting money into your church. Now, that sounds very unspiritual, I know. But I'm just saying, if you don't have some way, either through online giving or through an app or through something, a kiosk in your foyer, you think, oh, that's way too high tech. You can do it with a $99 tablet and a free card reader and a free app. You can set up giving in your church where they slide a credit card or a debit card and they punch in how much they want to give. We have several churches that have those. Church plants that are brand new churches. They're not expensive. They're not hard to do. But they cater to younger families. And so we've got to have a plan for this stuff. And we don't think about that a lot of times in our established churches. All we think about stewardship is passing the plate. Well, passing the plate is fine, and I'm all for that, and I'm not ready to give that up because I believe it's important and it's a part of worship as we give back to God. But if we don't have other ways for people to give, we're missing out on an opportunity for people to be able to be obedient to God and to give because they don't have checks and they don't carry cash. And that's part of your stewardship strategy. But not only just that, but taking teaching moments. Did you know that most people, especially new people that come to your church, especially people that don't have any kind of a church background, they don't have a clue what your church offering does. They don't have a clue. They have no idea that when they give in your church offering, if you're a co-op church or you're a partner church that gives to, national ministries or whatever, when they give money, they're helping international missions, they're helping plant churches and home missions, they're helping Christian education, they're helping, the crisis pregnancy center in your town that your church might support or whatever it might be. Most people have no idea of that because they don't come to your business meetings, they don't look at your budget, they don't know what your stuff goes to. And so take 60 seconds before the offering and just say, hey, I call it a teaching moment. Just use a teaching moment and say, let me just tell you real quickly that when you give, you're helping clothe the orphan kids in our community, or we're helping put food on the table of a needy family because we support this in our community. Or you're helping plant churches in North America because a portion of what we receive goes to North American ministries to plant churches or international missions or whatever. And that gets people's attention because people really don't care about paying your salary and paying the light bill. But they really are interested in helping plant churches across North America or feeding children in Africa or helping at your local crisis pregnancy center. That'll strike a chord, especially with millennials and younger generations, if they know what the money in your church really goes for. And so you need to tell them that, but have some kind of a teaching moment. But then your stewardship System also includes any kind of giving that your church needs to have to raise money for capital improvements, for buildings, for vans, for whatever. Have some kind of a system so that you know how all that stuff is going to happen. System number 6, I got to hurry, member care. This one I won't spend a lot of time on because probably of all 8 systems, this is the one we do the best in the church. And that may be somewhat of an indictment against us because the truth of the matter is most of our focus is inward instead of outward. And we do a good job at taking care of our members, but are we really doing a good job on outreach and all of that? But member care, it's caring for the flock, caring for the sick, caring for the shut-ins, the widows, the orphans, caring for the needy. It includes counseling, what you do to help people in your church with marriage issues or family issues or crisis counseling or whatever it might be. So member care is an essential system. Number 7, leadership. Leadership. Now this one very much overlaps the teaching system because they go very much hand in hand. But when you talk about leadership, I want you to think of that as everything that has to do with people involved in ministry in your church. It includes the pastor, the paid staff, the volunteer staff, how you're going to recruit volunteers, what your system is for that. Do you have annual elections? Are teachers appointed? Who's appointed? How are things taken care of? Accountability, legal issues, legal liabilities in your church. It goes to the background screenings we talked about, doing the ministry descriptions, a handbook. Does your church need a handbook? Yeah, I think it does. All those ministry descriptions that I talked about earlier, put those all together and have a handbook. That would be something. It is also would be a good place for you to put policies for your church. If somebody wants to use your building for a wedding, what are the policies? Our stand on homosexuality and same-sex marriage. All of those types of things can be as a part of your church handbook. I know that, again, sounds very clinical and very unspiritual, but we live in a world, we need that stuff. So, and then system 8, last one, I'll wrap this up real quick, is continual evaluation. Now, I believe this is an essential system, and you may think, well, what does that have to do? How is that really a system? Well, if you aren't willing to evaluate things, then you're never really going to take an honest look at anything you do. And I think that evaluation is very, very important. You need to have an honest process to look at things that you do, figure out what's working, what's not working, how you change things, how the process goes. If a teacher wants to paint their classroom, what hoops do they have to jump through to do that? That could be a part of the handbook, but that's also part of your continual evaluation. What are we evaluating? What are we trying to figure out? And you can do that through a lot of ways, but you need to have where people can have input. Now, I am not for sending out church-wide surveys. Do you like our music? Don't do that, okay? Is it too hot or too cold on an average Sunday? Don't do those kind of things. I'm not talking about that. But I'm just saying that there needs to be some way for people to input or have input into the ministries. Are we meeting a need? Are we really fulfilling a need in our community, in our church, or whatever, when we're doing these various things? You may be doing things and spending a lot of time, effort, volunteers, resources, and all that on it, and it's really not that important to people in your church. I mean, you've got to have a way to know all of that. And then there's the next part of this, and I don't really have time to get into this because really our time is up, but fixing broken systems or creating new systems. Now, I do 2 different seminars on those. One that I call Structuring Your Church for Growth. We talk about fixing broken systems, and then I do one on strategic planning. And again, I'm a planner. That's just kind of who I am. But if you've discovered through that list and thinking about your church that you have a system that's completely missing, you don't even have it, I would encourage you to go back and start thinking it through, the pieces of it, and what do we need to do to put it together. Get some other people to think with you. Get a brainstorming session together and figure out the steps and just figure it out piece by piece. And this is the what we have to do to make sure this system gets built for our church. Now, let me just say that, but then let me say, go back to the broken systems. You say, okay, we have a stewardship system. Every church does. If you pass the plate, that's something. So you have a system, but here's some things we need to do to improve our stewardship system. I would encourage you, the natural tendency is to go back and tackle the biggest job first. Well, if you've ever been through Dave Ramsey's financial peace stuff, I think that principle is good there, and it applies here. Don't start with the biggest thing, start with the smallest thing, okay? And fix that first. And then you can take the attention, resources, energy that you spend on fixing that, and you can tackle the next biggest job, and then the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. It starts to get the snowball effect, okay? And so he talks about that in reducing debt, but same thing is true in your church. If you have a member care system and you say, you know what, we do pretty good member care, except we don't really have anything for counseling. Okay, let's figure out, what do we need to do? Can we refer people? Do we have people in the community we know, we trust? Can we pay for counseling for people for 3 sessions or whatever? Figure it out. That's your system. Okay, so you can say, okay, our member care system is pretty good. Now, we do pretty good in outreach, but we need to tweak it a little bit. Then look at that one. And then you build up to, you say, this one's completely missing, and we need to do something with that. And so start with the easier ones first. You can work your way up and fix the ones that are missing later. I'm out of time. I need to quit.